Title: The Unspoken Love. Mr. and Mrs. Ken had always dreamed of having a child. From the moment they married, they imagined filling their home with the laughter and joy of children. They envisioned birthday parties, family vacations, and teaching their child the ways of the world. But as the years passed, their dreams began to feel more like a distant hope. Despite numerous visits to doctors, various fertility treatments, and heartfelt prayers, they found themselves unable to conceive. IVF was their final attempt, a last glimmer of hope. They endured the emotional roller coaster of fertility treatments, believing each round would bring them closer to the child they so desperately wanted. But time and time again, the test results were negative. The joy they once hoped for seemed to slip further away with each disappointment. Mrs. Ken, particularly, found herself growing weary, not just physically but emotionally, as month after month their hopes crumbled. She often sat by the window, gazing at the families in the park, wishing it could be her turn to have a child to hold, to teach, to love. It was during one of those moments of longing that the idea of adoption first crossed her mind. Mr. Ken, always supportive, agreed that their hearts had so much love to give, and there were children in need of a family. They decided to adopt. After an emotionally taxing process of interviews, home checks, and waiting, a young boy named Ethan was brought into their lives. Ethan was quiet, reserved, with eyes that seemed to carry a world of unspoken stories. He was 5 years old with a past he couldn't fully explain. He was not of their blood, but soon he became their world. The Kens tried their best to make him feel welcomed, loved, and safe. They poured their love into him, even though it often felt like the connection was not as natural as they had imagined. Ethan struggled with adapting to his new life, and Mr. and Mrs. Ken found themselves frustrated when he didn't respond the way they had hoped. Their love, though sincere, became clouded with expectations. They pushed him to perform well in school, to be polite and obedient, and to fit into the mold they had imagined for their child. Every time Ethan made a mistake, it seemed to bring out their own insecurities about his past and about their ability to be good parents. The cracks began to form in their relationship, though they couldn't yet see them. As Ethan grew older, the tension between them deepened. The Kens' expectations became more rigid. They enrolled him in numerous extracurricular activities, hoping that he would excel and make them proud. But Ethan, carrying the emotional weight of his past and the pressure of his adoptive parents' demands, began to pull away. His grades faltered, and he began to isolate himself, retreating to his room more and more. The joy they had envisioned in their home was slowly replaced by frustration and misunderstanding. Years passed, and Ethan became a teenager. He rebelled in small ways, sneaking out, lying about where he'd been, staying out late with friends who weren't always the best influence. The Kens saw this as a sign of disrespect and defiance. They scolded him, lectured him, and at times even resorted to harsh punishment. The more they tried to control him, the more Ethan retreated into himself. The emotional distance between them widened, and the love they had tried to build now seemed fragile and worn. Finally, when Ethan turned 18, he left home to attend university. Mrs. Ken cried as he packed his things, but Mr. Ken, though equally sad, tried to reassure her, telling her that it was only a phase and that Ethan would return. But Ethan didn't come back as often as they had hoped. The distance between them grew not just physically, but emotionally. Then came the day when Ethan introduced them to Sarah, a sweet woman he had met at university. They were married a year later, and as they started their own life together, visits to his adoptive parents became more sporadic. The Kens, still holding on to the hope that one day their son would return to them, found themselves growing more and more upset at his absence. Mr. and Mrs. Ken had invested so much of their hearts into raising Ethan, but now, as they looked at the empty house, the silence felt deafening. "We gave him everything," Mrs. Ken would often say, her voice tinged with frustration. "We fought for him, we sacrificed, and now he won't even visit." The loneliness settled heavily over them, and with it, the resentment. One evening, after another brief and distant phone call from Ethan, Mrs. Ken broke down. "He doesn't care, does he?" she asked, her voice breaking. "All those years we spent loving him, teaching him. and now he's too busy with his own life to even care. The child they had raised, and the bitter reality that their sacrifices seemed to mean. Mr. Ken sat quietly, his heart heavy with a mixture of sadness and guilt. He couldn't understand it either. They had raised Ethan, done everything they could to provide for him, and yet it seemed like they were invisible in his world. Even when they reached out, he was distant. "I don't know," Mr. Ken replied quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "Maybe we pushed him too hard. Maybe we asked too much." Their conversations often returned to this theme: the love they had given, the child they had raised, and the bitter reality that their sacrifices seemed to mean little in the grand scheme of things. Ethan and Sarah, busy with their own careers and family life, continued to grow further from the Kens. The once strong bond had dissolved into polite, awkward phone calls and the occasional holiday visit, where the tension in the room was palpable. One evening, after a long period of silence, Mr. and Mrs. Ken decided to visit Ethan and Sarah. They wanted to talk, to finally express the hurt that had been building over the years. When they arrived at their home, it was as if they were strangers. Sarah greeted them warmly, but Ethan seemed distracted, barely looking up from his phone as they spoke. It was then that Mrs. Ken, unable to hold back her emotions any longer, spoke up. "Ethan, we raised you. We gave you everything we had. And now, in our time of need, you can't even be bothered to visit us, to help us out, to show us some love." Her words hung in the air, sharp and raw. Ethan looked up, his expression unreadable. "We've got our own lives now, Mom. I'm sorry, but we can't always drop everything for you. You and Dad raised me, yes, but we've got our own family to take care of." His tone was cold, distant. Mr. Ken's heart shattered, and he stood, unable to look at his son. "We gave you everything, Ethan, and this is how you repay us?" The silence in the room was deafening. Sarah looked between the two, her face conflicted, unsure of what to say. Ethan, however, didn't seem moved. He had grown up with a sense of independence, and now, as an adult, he was too absorbed in his own world to recognize the deep ache in his adoptive parents' hearts. As Mr. and Mrs. Ken left their son's home, that day, the weight of the years, of their hopes, dreams, and sacrifices, crashed down on them. They had wanted nothing more than for their child to understand the depth of their love, but it seemed that love had been buried under layers of misunderstanding, unmet expectations, and time. That night, as they sat together in silence, the reality of their relationship with Ethan settled in. They had loved him fiercely, and yet they had failed to understand the needs of the child they had raised. And now, their hearts ached not just for the son who had grown distant, but for themselves, and the love they had given, now lost in the chasm of unmet expectations. It wasn't too late for redemption, but the scars of neglect and miscommunication were deep. The once strong bond of parent and child had been tested, and now both sides were left to wonder if the love they had so desperately tried to hold on to could ever truly be healed.